was not read. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, on Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, on Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the AZAPO online political education platform. And here we are today on this, the 23rd of May, 2021. My name is Simpuya Ashe, and today I am with Professor John Trimble, a comrade and stalwart of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. We are going to be looking at the 58th anniversary of the African Liberation Day. And the topic of his talk is going to be focused around combating neo-colonialism and underdevelopment in Africa. Welcome to our platform, Comrade John Trimble.
Thank you very much for having me here today.
Just a bit about Professor John Trimble. He is not new to this platform. You would recall that we hosted him not so long ago when we were focusing on influence of American politics, Africa and the diaspora. Professor Trimble is currently a professor in industrial engineering at TUT here in South Africa. In the past, he has taught engineering and computer science in the USA, Rwanda, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. He is the director of the International Network on Appropriate Technology. He has been organizing with the All-African People's Revolutionary Party since 1975. He has served in various capacities with the A-APRP in Africa and the USA. And he has helped organize the African Liberation Day in the USA, Kenya, Senegal, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania. He's very much committed to help build a revolutionary African intelligentsia that works with the masses for PanAfricanism, a liberated and unified Africa under scientific socialism. And some of you would recall that, on the 25th of May, 1963, representatives of about 30 African nations met in Ethiopia at Addis Ababa. And by then, I think about close to 2/3 of the continent had obtained their own liberation, and mostly from, the colonizers of Europe. It was at this meeting that the OAU was founded, and with the aim of continuing to assist the rest of the continent to get liberated and fight colonialism in the rest of the continent. So there was, at that gathering, unified support to assist all those other countries that were still, languishing in oppression, to support them fight for their liberation. And, a charter to that extent was set up that was signed by all the African countries present except Morocco. And since then, Africa has continued to commemorate the African Liberation Day, and this coming 25th of May will be the 58th anniversary of that founding of the African Liberation Day. Professor Trimble, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking AZAPO, the Zanian People's Organization, for hosting not just me today, but for hosting this continuing Sunday afternoon online political education program The All-African People's Revolutionary Party finds political education to be central in terms of raising the consciousness of our people, because this is necessary in terms of us waging revolution to achieve the justice that we're due. I wanted to start by saying a few more words about African Liberation Day. I think it's important that we emphasize the African Liberation Day, the liberation part. A lot of states, even here in Azania, are now just wanting to refer to this as Africa Day, taking out the liberation part as if we've achieved liberation. And we realize that all of Africa really is languishing under neo-colonialism, a new form of colonialism. And while we may be able to elect our officials, we still are in a system that's very oppressive. So we still have to emphasize the need for African liberation. So this is why the All-African People's Revolutionary Party insists on referring to May 25th as African Liberation Day, not just Africa Day. It's not just a day to go out and celebrate the past as if you were thinking that we had achieved an absolute victory. It's good to be able to point to the victories that we have, and we see our victories against apartheid and against colonialism as victories, but we also recognize that what we're currently suffering under, the oppression that we're currently faced with, is very noxious, is very dangerous, and that we need to educate our people about neocolonialism and to intensify the fight against neocolonialism. Prior to 63, actually dating back to 1958, with the first Conference of Independent States in Accra, Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, led the charge in instituting this day, first on April 15th as African Freedom Day. And then it was in 1963 that at the founding of the Organization of African Unity that Africa decided on renaming this African Liberation Day and situating it on to May 25th, since that was the convening day of the first OAU meeting. Since then, this has been used as a focal point to organize efforts to fight against colonialism, to fight against the oppression that we're experiencing in terms of imperialism and capitalism in Africa, but not just in Africa. It's been a rallying point in terms of bringing liberation forces globally together. And this is something that I've had the opportunity to participate in since 1973. In fact, it is one of the things that actually brought me to the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, the fact that the A-APRP was instrumental in organizing African Liberation Days across the US in an effort to highlight the oppression that Africans were facing in Southern Africa at that time initially, both under the Portuguese and in the case of Rhodesia and occupied Azania. Fortunately, we've seen victories in these cases, but unfortunately, many people have seen misunderstood these victories in terms of thinking that they were absolute. But we continue to be vigilant in terms of organizing African Liberation Day. We believe that it's important that we institutionalize it, that we engage in revolutionary organizations like AZAPO, like the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, like PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau, to institutionalize this work around African Liberation Day. This institutionalization is about organizing. It's about us organizing not only our particular organizations, but organizing in terms of a broader Pan-African movement. This is one of the reasons the All-African People's Revolutionary Party chose as the theme for this African Liberation Day, quote, "Forward ever to worldwide Pan-African unity." Forward ever to worldwide Pan-African unity. Because it's so instrumental that we not only organize and bring together our forces in respective locations in terms of revolutionary political parties, but we organize the broader Pan-African movement. Both AZAPO and the A-APRP are members of the Worldwide Pan-African Movement. In fact, you can visit our website at www.pam.org that lists a number of other organizations that are part of this movement. And those of you who may be on this broadcast that are part of revolutionary African organizations, you're welcome to join WWPAM and to assist us in this important effort in terms of organizing worldwide Pan-African unity. The All-African People's Revolutionary Party views as its objective Pan-Africanism, and we concisely define Pan-Africanism as the total liberation and total unification of Africa under scientific socialism. We think this is important. We understand that some organizations embrace Pan-Africanism as a set of ideas, their ideology. We understand also Pan-Africanism as a broader movement, but we think it's essential that we follow in the footsteps of Nkrumah and in the footsteps of the Fifth Pan-African Congress that clearly laid out the agenda in terms of totally liberating Africa, unifying it, and bringing it together under scientific socialism. We realized to popularize Pan-Africanism as an objective is essential in terms of us ending oppression that African people face, not only in Africa, but globally. So we want to popularize Pan-Africanism as this total liberation, unification, and Africa developed under scientific socialism, because in popularizing this as a just objective, it not only calls on Africans, whether they're part of our political parties or not, to embrace this as a just end to the oppression that we face, but it also challenges and calls on non-Africans to understand that this is the point that we all must struggle for in terms of ending oppression in Africa and ending the oppression of Africans in the diaspora. And we'll understand that to end this oppression, which would end the exploitation of the resources of Africa by these imperialist, capitalist, and neo-colonial forces, that this will unleash not only a giant force in Africa and amongst Africans in the diaspora to achieve the justice that they're due as a people and as a nation, but unleash this massive force that then can aid others in the just struggle to end capitalism and bring about world socialism. And I think this was an important point that Kwame Nkrumah ended his book on class struggle in Africa, in terms of pointing out the contribution that a unified socialist Africa would have, not only to the world development of socialism, but to the eventual development of world communism, where we see a society where people are contributing based on their ability and receiving based on their need. So this is important in terms of understanding the linkage between Africa and the international struggles that we face. I want to say a few other things about the organization I represent, the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, by starting with the very first words, All-African. Our party is an effort to organize Africans globally. So it's a global effort, because we realize that Africans, whether they're sitting and living here in occupied Azania, or whether they are across the way in Mozambique speaking Portuguese, or whether they are in a country in West Africa like Gabon, Senegal, speaking English, speaking French because of the colonial legacy there, or whether they're in Bissau, suffering under the legacy of Portuguese colonialism. We realize that all of these Africans should have an allegiance to the whole of Africa, just as our African comrades, brothers, sisters, and siblings that may live in Germany or may live in London or may live in Jamaica or Haiti, that all of us should see our homeland as Africa and should have an allegiance to Africa and that this allegiance should drive us to organizing Africans wherever we are for Mother Africa. With this in mind, we understand that we have to educate ourselves in terms of what is going on in terms of the oppression that Africans face in Africa and the diaspora, because it's only through that political education process, our analysis of understanding our oppression, that we can then develop the strategies and tactics to fight off this oppression. Second, about the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, I want to focus on the fact that we're a revolutionary organization. A revolutionary organization. And to understand that, we must clearly understand what revolution is. Revolution is a drastic change that brings about an extreme drastic improvement. So it's a difference between radical change and revolutionary change. Radical change just means a drastic change. You can have a radical change and it doesn't necessarily have to be revolutionary. So we want to emphasize that we are a revolutionary political party, and we seek to have all our comrades engage in a revolutionary fashion. One of the things I emphasize when I speak to students, even when I'm not representing the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, but even when I speak to my students about their studies, is I emphasize to them the importance of taking a revolutionary approach to their studies. And this is something I want to reach out and mention to everyone on this session. Whatever you're engaged in, whatever your passion, whatever your vocation, you want to take a revolutionary stance. If you're a medical profession, if you're a physicist, you don't want to just be an ordinary physicist. You should want to make a revolutionary contribution to that. If you're an engineer, you don't want to just follow the line of other engineers work in a mundane environment. You should want to make a revolutionary contribution, because it's these revolutionary contributions that advance society, they advance our culture, they advance our well-being. So you should think in terms of being revolutionary in whatever you engage in. Why? We as conscious beings, the one thing that we say separates us as human beings from other species is our consciousness. So that means we are aware of what is going on, and we are aware of what we can do in terms of making a contribution. So you can either decide that I'm going to make a meager contribution and relax and then spend my time enjoying myself, or you can decide that I'm going to sacrifice and I'm going to work harder because I want to make a revolutionary contribution and I want to be a revolutionary. So let's take that beyond just your individual vocation, your individual passion, and realize that that contribution in terms of being a revolutionary must be something that you engage in all the time, and that you embrace this notion of revolution in terms of transforming the society around you. Because certainly we all realize that there are all forms of oppression that we see in the society around us, and that we want to end this oppression. And we want to end this oppression as fast as possible. And this is where this drastic transformation for a better world comes in. So it's important that everyone understand what revolution is, and understand that embracing revolution represents the highest form of being human. I want to now reflect on the third point with regards to the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. That is that we are a political party. There are different types of organizations: student organizations, labor organizations, non-governmental organizations. But we are a political party because we seek to transform society in terms of the political makeup. We want to shake up the political makeup. And this is why we're embracing as our objective PanAfricanism in terms of bringing all of Africa together and developing it under scientific socialism. This is an extreme political change that represents revolution. So as a political party, we seek the power to not only speak of Pan-Africanism, but to bring it about. Of course, we realize that this will not be done by the handful of members that we currently have. So we have embraced as a program to build a revolutionary African political party, to build revolutionary Pan-African movement, to build revolutionary socialist fronts. All of this is necessary in terms of organizing our people to not only embrace the idea of revolution, but to engage in the activism that's necessary for revolution. In order to bring about Pan-Africanism, it requires us to fight vigorously against capitalism, imperialism, Zionism, and Neo-Colonialism. In order to fight against these things, we must understand these. So we can trace capitalist development through colonialism, through slavery, through the slave trade. We understand by reading material like Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery, Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, we come to understand how capitalism arose out of the oppression of African people and indigenous people in the Americas and Asia through the exploits of the conquest attitude that these select European nations had engaged in terms of the colonial process. So we've come to understand this so that we now better understand the situation that we're currently faced with. The result of this colonial adventure, this effort at conquest, has resulted in not only wealthy capitalist hosts such as Britain and the European countries and Japan, but it has created significant settler capitalist countries. And this is important to understand because quite often society doesn't want to refer to the United States of America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand as what they really are. They are nothing more than settler colonies. They're nothing more than settler capitalist countries. These were what you could view as the successful settler children of Great Britain. We know that Britain attempted to set up countries in Africa as settler states. This is why we have occupied Azania now. I refer to it as occupied Azania because South Africa is nothing more than the European name, just as Rhodesia was, just as Southwest Africa was. And the fact that it is still being called South Africa reflects the fact that we are sitting here in occupied Azania. It reflects the fact that there's still the remnants of settler colonialism that dominates economically in occupied Azania. And I want to make this distinction between capitalism, capitalist countries that are inherently, initially capitalist, and those that are settler capitalist countries, because it's important to extend our understanding of the importance of land as we have understood it here in Africa, because we are going to seize our land back, and this is becoming a very significant point of contention here in occupied Azania. But we need to extend this idea in terms of the indigenous people having the land rights, whether it's in the Americas, or whether it's in New Zealand or Australia, because the same process where European colonizers came to Southern Africa and attempted to seize all of our land and occupy large parts of the land, not only here in occupied Azania, but still in Namibia and Malawi and Zimbabwe, that we have to extend this point of justice in terms of us taking the land back, the people taking the land back. We have to extend this point to all people, not just those in America, not just those in Australia and New Zealand, in addition to Africa. A focal point now is occupied Palestine. Many of you followed the terrible, terrible approaches that the Zionists Israeli took in terms of their so-called response to a few missiles that were launched, which were actually the response to their oppressive handling of citizens in Jerusalem and how they killed hundreds of innocent people in Gaza. This is a result of the settler capitalist setup in occupied Palestine today. And there's no surprise the collusion that you find between settler capitalists. It's no surprise that the major supporters of Israel is the United States, which is the most powerful settler capitalist country. It's no surprise that we find Zionists even here in occupied Azania that want to speak out and defend Israel and all the atrocities that they're committing. So we feel it's important that we link these things together, settler capitalism with the mother of capitalism in terms of Britain, and understand how this connection has led to the most powerful capitalist country in terms of the US that now extends its efforts in terms of domination by having over 800 military bases around the world and occupying all continents in terms of military bases, with no exception, all continents, and many islands in the middle of nowhere, you would think they're military bases. And this is an effort to extend this insidious types of oppression of people across the world. So I would now want to speak more on the nature of neocolonialism. We speak to how, capitalism itself transferred control from European royal families and the church with the rise of mercantile capitalism, and such that capitalists were able to, these industrial capitalists and banking and insurance capitalists were able to amass money and then take control over the overall, not only political and industrial, but also military aspects of their nations. But then it branched off into imperialism when finance capital became very significant and became used as a tool to gain control over different states in terms of the colonial process. And this was when the international banking collaborations and multinational corporations grew in terms of this wedding of advancing industry with the financing of that industry and trade. But what we see now is the legacy of neocolonialism. And this is important to understand because of this misnotion that somehow because we've been, in some cases given, in other cases fought for this right to have the vote and therefore have Africans elected to these positions, that we somehow are experiencing some level of freedom when we're not. It's a new form of colonialism. And this form of colonialism is administered because of the legacy that these multinational corporations, these banking apparatus had in terms of controlling our land, controlling our farms, setting up plantations, sugar plantations like here in Zimbabwe, and most significantly in controlling the monetary setup in all of the countries that were former colonies. And we can see how insidious this is when we look at many of the French former colonies that actually have their gold sitting in France and are linked to a currency that's pegged by the French and not by their particular states. This is the insidious nature in terms of the finance system has in terms of maintaining this. So this, under neocolonialism, we see this continued linkage with the financial centers in New York and London and Paris, and not controlled really by Johannesburg or by Nairobi. Other forms that they continued with was this control of credit. This is a very insidious thing. And we see how they have put pressure on different states to maintain neocolonialism. A good example is what they've done in terms of the damage in Zimbabwe. The damage in Zimbabwe, the cause of hyperinflation was very much linked to the control of credit. Now, the control of credit was coupled with their ability to freeze assets of the leadership and many members of the governing party there, and also to set up sanctions where they would not allow banks to operate, they would not allow different corporations to have relationships. But the key centerpiece of that is the control of credit. So think of it as if you're an individual and you're trying to advance either because you're setting up a business or you're just trying to buy a small home or a car or a motorcycle, and you need to have credit to do that. And if the bank says no, that means you can't do this. You can't get a job, you can't advance, you can't do a number of things. So imagine on a national basis the damage that does. So under neocolonialism, through this operation of finance capital, they keep the grips on African countries and other members of the global South by this control of credit. A second way they do this is to control the pricing. The control of pricing. One of the things that they've done in terms of the damage to many countries that are trying to move forward and have some types of resources is that they control the prices. They control the prices of oil. They control the prices of gold even. They control the prices of platinum. So this control over pricing is one of the things that Nkrumah in his classic work on neocolonialism pointing out is an insidious focal point of neocolonialism. They also control shipping and all forms of transport. Africa has no fleet that then decides we're going to ship, whether it's our cocoa or our bananas or our coffee. We have no shipping lines that we can say, okay, we're the ones that are going to ship this, whether it's to China or to Europe. And based on these conditions, this is how much we're charging, how long it's going to take, who gets priority on what gets shipped where. We have no control over that. So this control of transport is another point that neocolonialism operates in terms of keeping us under their foot. So neocolonialism is made possible in all these levels because Africa is divided. Because Africa is divided, you have a small corner of the Africa called Djibouti, which was split up because Somalia under colonialism was divided amongst the English and the French and the Italians. And the French got this little corner with the harbor. And as a result of that, this small piece of land sees that the only way that they think they can survive is to allow various nations to set up bases there, from a harbor that's being used by the Chinese to a huge facility that's being used to launch drones by the US, to the French having a port there. And they see this as their only way of survival in terms of maintaining a grip on the political apparatus of that country, which then allows them to do some positive things in terms of the people, but also mainly allows them to maintain power. And this is the relationship that across neocolonialism, you have many political parties operating. They understand the neocolonial agents that operate political parties in Africa who are set up to maintain power. They want to maintain power. The ANC wants to maintain power here in occupied Azania. And they make compromises to the neocolonial powers that exist through this finance apparatus and this multinational corporations. So by keeping us divided, they've been able to continue neocolonialism. So we understand there's only one solution, and that is African unity. Africa must come together and seize control of our resources. We must make bold moves. We must call for the cancellation of all these so-called debts to the IMF and the World Bank and to the Citibank and to the Club of Paris. We must unilaterally move as Africans and say, why should we be paying these debts when you've been ripping us off for years of our resources? That you've been these banks are the ones that were built all through funds that were achieved through the slave trade and slavery. That's how these banks got their initial money. They should be paying us reparations for the damage that they've done to us. So we need, as a people across Africa and the diaspora, to make a bold move and call for the cancellation of these debts as just a down payment on the reparations that we're owed. So it's important that we make these bold moves. And it's important that we challenge those in power. But more importantly is that we have to organize the masses of our people to do this, because without a massive, mass-based organization that challenges the neo-colonial agents in these African states, we won't see a change. We won't see a change. So this is important. And it's important that in this process of calling for African unity, that we make it clear that we do not want to replace the capitalist apparatus that's controlling African states with a capitalist apparatus. We can only, in terms of ending our oppression and working for the people, we can only work for socialist development. We can only work for a society where the people are in control of the resources, and that the monies gained from the resources, whether it's the platinum mines or whether it's the auto factories, that the monies gained from these ventures in mining and farming and manufacturing, that all these monies go back to meet the needs of the people, to address the needs of the people, and that we have a vigorous effort in terms of land reclamation. It's important that we distinguish the Africanists from the charterists. We do not believe that all the land, just because you second generation live here, or you even a worker, that somehow all of a sudden you have equal share in the land. We affirm the right of indigenous peoples in occupied Azania, across Africa, across the Americas, across the world. We affirm the right of indigenous people to reclaim their land, from Palestine to New Orleans to Brazil, and of course here in occupied Azania. So this is important, because embracing the land rights of indigenous people extend our quest for justice on a global basis. It extends our quest for justice, and this is why we have to cry out loudly in terms of opposing the oppression that Palestinians faced this last week, during this month, in terms of the jets flying into Gaza and just blowing up buildings, claiming that, there was a Hamas leader somewhere in there under the rubble, despite the fact that we've killed innocent children and women. We have to be appalled at this type of oppression. This is a form of racism. This is a form of apartheid that's unjustifiable. And as people here in occupied Azania who experienced apartheid, it's on us to be at the forefront of this struggle against the latest form of apartheid. We must speak out in support of the indigenous peoples in the Americas, Australia, in places where somehow the Europeans are under the confused notion that because they created a near genocidal environment and wiped out 90% of indigenous people, that somehow that gives them the right to the people's land. No, even if it's just 1% of 1% of the indigenous people who remain standing, is still their land. If someone came and took out everyone in your family of 100 people, and there's just one grandchild left in the room, and then 2 generations later, they can't then come and claim that, hey, well, it's no one to occupy this land. It's just one person left, so we have to stay here. No, we realize that injustice is injustice, and we have to fight it wherever it is. So at this point, I want to, sort of pull up to stop and maybe give a chance to answer some questions with regards to either what the All-African People's Revolutionary Party is doing, or questions with regard to neo-colonialism. One last point, one of the ways that we try to work with all Africans all over is we have what's called our Political Education Work Study Circle program, where we engage with Africans all over the world. We set up circles where they can study about Pan-Africanism, they can study and understand better what capitalism, imperialism, and neo-colonialism is, and to be able to organize to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a mouthful, Professor Trimble, and I'm sure all of us who were listening enjoyed your lecture and contribution, and it was really beneficial and to enhancing the knowledge and education about Africa, about oppression in Africa, and about the importance of solidarity of the oppressed in liberating Mother Tanzania and Mother Africa. And I think, the solidarity amongst the oppressed can never be overemphasized, and it is something that, requires conscious effort. It requires all of us to commit to struggle. I love the point you make that, whatever we do in our lives should be a contribution towards contributing to the revolution. It should be a contribution towards educating our people about the importance of struggle, about the importance of the revolution. I have requested Dr. Mxolisi Notshulwana to respond to your lecture, and I'm sure he is ready to talk to us. I'm not sure what's happening with you. You're there.
I'm here. Can you hear me, comrade?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you, but even though we cannot see you, there's something
Yeah.
not right with your camera there. If you can just sort out your camera settings.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, it keeps.
No, yeah, it doesn't want to show your face, but you
doesn't
can make
want to show my face. Doesn't want to show.
You can make your contribution.
Yeah, let me start off. Let me start off by saying it's quite a comprehensive evaluation of Africa's position today that we just had. Very extensive, very focused on key areas at which we have to wrestle with as Africans. Some of the challenges that Professor Trimble has, within a very short space of time, actually, delved into them quite extensively. I mean, the quest for justice, as he says towards his closing remarks, is rested fundamentally on the unresolved question of land. We see it in Palestine, we see it here in South Africa, and those are the issues that fundamentally Africans wrestle with every day. A key element, though, towards the end of that talk as well, which is very comprehensive and brilliant, is the question that we wrestle with as Africans. How do we develop an African agency to deal with the neo-colonial onslaught that we're faced with as a challenge on the continent today? Professor Trimble delves very closely, goes straight to difficult questions that we have to deal with as Africans to get around the development of that African agency. Issues around how divided the continent is. Gives us an example of a particular country. In that example, he again expensively shows how neo-colonialism will always drive on those divisions in order to catch us into the corners and the situations and prolong the situations in which we are in. I think it's It's the analysis that fascinates me. I mean, we shared some notes with Simpio when Prof was talking about this part. Your analysis of global capitalism, the global economic system, underwritten correctly, as you said, Prof, by the US since World War II, and as a bulwark upon which neo-imperialist, neo-colonialist struggles are waged by the former colonializers to continue to pose a stranglehold on the continent. I like your analysis over the control over land, the economy, the commerce, the labor, credit, pricing. All of those are linked and directed by those systems underpinning that system, that global system of domination. I happen to work in a banking system that deals with credit in an infrastructure space in the continent. Issues around credit and pricing pretty much resolve around the very same issues that Prof talked about. And the revolutionary struggles that we have to wage to bring about transformation that is substantive, not transformation that we see in our country that has no meaning whatsoever on the lives of Black people and African people in general. And all these now different versions that are emerging, both in scholarship as well as in political circles in this country, all over the world, giving different version of the colonial struggles that people like Kwame Nkrumah, you mentioned, Prof, waged against imperialism and colonialism as a way of placing in the minds of our children and our people a different version of African nationalism that is ahistorical and apolitical. The intention there, as you correctly said, Prof, is to bend that very same point you started with, the consciousness of our people that they need to have in order to be able to look at all these struggles around African liberation and the victories we've won. And how we get to that critical question, which you also raised quite fundamentally, around African unity and the definition of PanAfricanism as total liberation of the continent. And what are these motive forces behind neo-imperialism that continue to provide the kind of propaganda which creates a continued stranglehold on Africa? They needed a new cloak. I think Prof has provided us with some examples of that in order to rationalize the neo-colonialist onslaught that we see today. To conclude, Piwe, I think the call is clear. I think I enjoyed some aspects of that call in respect to how we must be eternally, I think, concurring the point you made as well, Simpiwe, in your review, that we must be continually vigilant as our contribution as Africans in whatever corner of the continent of the world we're in, to make sure that we join struggles to fight against the misleading imperialist propaganda against our people, that we must constantly, consistently, and be carefully be attentive to explanations like the ones we've just heard now, deep-rooted intellectual thinking, comprehensive explanation of our situation so as to comprehend it better, so as to understand it, away from the sugar-coated malice and designs of the imperialist onslaught that we always see in our media, in our spaces, knowledge spaces, all over this country in particular, and elsewhere in the world and in the continent. So in conclusion, I would say I agree with everything that the Prof has said, particularly the aspects around the analysis around the global economic system that creates this stranglehold, that produces the kinds of exploitative systems and mechanisms that we find in our countries with the trading rating agencies that provide for the continued domination of Western ways of defining prices, credit, how loans are. The emergence of China now provides even a more headache for them, because China is messing up their designs that were constructed many years ago to foist us into that kind of system. So I I think as an African, I take heed of the call that wherever I am, I must be vigilant in terms of my contribution, my particular contribution, to make sure that it pushes back the misleading and the dominating neo-colonial aspects of confusing our people, especially our youth in this country and in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Notshulwana. That was a mouthful, and I'll allow another speaker just to also provide a response to Professor Trimble before he responds. Comrade Nelvis.
Thank you, Comrade Sempiwe. I think you will agree that there is no space left after the groundbreaking contributions by the two professors. But let me just try briefly and emphasize 2 or 3 points. I must say that, first of all, I was really fascinated by the emphasis on the term occupied Azania, which was a term that we used quite a lot, before 1994. And then to see that it is persisting even after 1994, after democracy, that is fascinating. And that term itself, it's helpful because it helps to situate you as revolutionaries in the knowledge and acceptance that a neo-colonialism still prevails. Once that happens, then you are clear about the type of struggle you are fighting. Now, that term is important also because it tends to limit, the negative effects of fundamentalist patriotism or nationalism, whereby, the people stop, worrying about what is happening around them, what is happening in the continent, in the world. They now become obsessed with what is happening within their own country, but not in the sense of changing, what is happening in their country, but to support to support their nationalism, to support their country, and then to rally around their countries. And in the process of doing all that, the struggles by the grassroots people, fade away. The struggles, by the people, by the working class, the peasants, to change, the economic system, topple it, all that fades away because people have become so patriotic, people have become so nationalistic that they forget about what is happening around. Instead of these people coming together, with the peoples around them in other nations, in other countries, and then under the cloak of international solidarity. So I think I wanted to emphasize that. But number 2, I also wanted to emphasize that the problem of Africa's underdevelopment should not only be seen in terms of endogenous factors, but there are also internal factors like the predator state that has developed under neo-colonialism, where the national bourgeoisie, or the national bourgeoisie, which now begins to take over the state, inherit the state apparatus, the oppressive state apparatus, and run it, for the benefit of the imperialist forces. It continues in this country as well. And that is characterized, by rampant corruption or grand scale corruption, which sees the resources that should otherwise have gone to developing the people, but go straight to the pockets of the imperialist forces, and with some small change going to the national or the local bourgeoisie. That is what is happening. And that is very bad because it allows us not to develop as a people based on a philosophical and ideological trajectory that can revolutionize, the country in terms of change. That is not happening because of this predator state. But also, there is a problem. Once you are, all this is happening, and the illicit flows are taking place because money is being lost to the imperialist forces in wrong ways, but also the people and the country are left once more, and even worse now, to the mercy of the imperialist forces. And that's where now the donor interventions come in. That's when now the cash transfers comes in from the donor countries, and you are now being controlled. How your development, no, I'm wrong, not development, how your underdevelopment will persist forever. Because your independence, has been bracketed. Your independence has been completely lost. And this time around, this is helped now or aided by your own people whom you have elected, by your own political parties whom you have voted for. They're in power. And then you do not see the color of the true color of the imperialists who are actually running the whole thing. This becomes a problem. And then once that happens, this national bourgeoisie or local bourgeoisie running the state, in terms of for the benefit of the imperialists, also make sure that your resources as a continent are not beneficiated. They actually enslave you to a system of extractive economy where you just dig your gold and throw it away to the imperialist forces at no price, at no value at all. At no value at all. Once it comes back, it hits you hard on the face and in your heart. It kills you actually. And then lastly, the point I wanted to emphasize are the sponsored violence in the continent. Sometimes it comes in terms of, a religion. It's either Christianity or Islam. You talk about the Boko Harams, you talk about the ISIL, you talk about the Al-Qaeda, you talk about the Al-Shabaab and M23 and many throughout. Just do a quick check about what is happening in terms of the violent footprint in the continent. Every country, every nation in the continent is occupied by sponsored violence to an extent that we are unable to develop as a people because all our resources must go to combating this violence. This is a problem, but look at something as simple, for instance, something as simple that to see that we are unable to grow. We can't focus on developing our economies and our people. Something as simple as traveling in the continent. If you've got to, leave from here in Tanzania, you go somewhere in another country in the continent, first, you've got to fly out of the continent to Europe and then take all your resources to Europe. And then, and only then, that Europe takes you back to Africa, and you've got to fly back to Europe and then back to Africa again. What nonsense is that? What nonsense is that? But look at China. Whatever you may say about China, but China, like Professor Notshulwana has said, China is very clear. If you're going to do any business with China, China will make it a point that you agree to disclose your business model. You agree actually to disclose and surrender your IP rights to China, such that China is no longer dependent upon you in 3 or 5 years' time. They're able to do the product themselves and manufacture it and sell it. Why can't we do the same? Why can't we do the same as a continent? Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Pagama. That was a mouthful, and maybe we should just give Comrade Trimble an opportunity to respond before we take other points.
Thank you. Thank you for the insightful comments. I'm going to try to, taking some notes, I'm going to try to respond to many of them quickly. The last one, I think, is in terms of why China is able to move forward, is important. Quite often when I talk, I ask students to say, what are the two fastest growing so-called underdeveloped countries? And the answer is China and India. And of course, China and India are over 1 billion people in each instance. Africa has 1.4 billion people now. But the big difference between China, India, and Africa is we're divided. So the unity is key. And part of that has to be a move to focus more on internal trade and collaboration within Africa. Secondly, on sponsored violence, I think that's a key point also that links to the fact that we lack unity. There's sponsored violence from Mozambique to Nigeria, you're right. The most insidious in the last 20 years, sponsored violence was the dismantlement of Libya by basically creating this no-fly zone and allowing NATO and the US to basically destroy the whole infrastructure from Benghazi to Tripoli that really caused the fall of Libya and the demise that we see continue today. If we were one unified Africa, that could never happen. You know, you couldn't have Shanghai somehow invaded without the rest of China responded. We couldn't have, Chennai in India invaded and dismantled without all of India responding. You couldn't have Miami in the US somehow invaded without all of US aid responding. But in terms of Africa, we allowed this because we're divided. On illicit flows out of Africa, I think this is a very important point. I think we need to reflect back even on that Mbeki report to the AU, which exposed a lot of that. It's unfortunate that that sort of just got shelved. Part of it was in Mbecky's conclusion where he thought that he could just take this report from the AU and turn it over to Europe and the US, who are actually the ones responsible for the illicit flows, and see some type of ethical response, which didn't happen. We need to study that report carefully and use some of the factual information in it to combat neocolonialism actively. I thought another important point was the fact that we have inherited the colonial state apparatus. This is one of the big reasons that we maintain neocolonialism, because the revolution means the drastic transformation. If we're talking about replacing colonialism and capitalism, you can't use the same state apparatus. You can't just inherit the same judicial system, the same set of ministries, and think that that's going to operate you. And this is what happened in occupied Tanzania. This is what happened in Zimbabwe. This has happened across Africa, and this is a big problem. So we have to understand when we gain colonial independence that the apparatus that we inherit is foreign. It's not to our interests. Narrow nationalism is a big problem, and this goes hand in hand with the divide in Africa. And it's one of the things I find most disturbing to me when I sometimes listen to these talk shows here, and somebody gets on and wants to blame Africans in Nigeria for this, or Africans from Zimbabwe for that, and not realize that we're all one people. So we have to combat this narrow nationalism. I think this is linked to the point that was raised in terms of the reactionary media. Right now, the battle of ideas is still dominated by capitalism. So that this reactionary media, whether it's the news, print press, or the TV or movies that they make, all reinforce these negative ideas. We have to combat this with our revolutionary propaganda. This is part of the reason I constantly emphasize that this is occupied Tanzania. We need to re-raise this whole question of one settler, one bullet. Not in the sense that we're talking about going out and shooting farmers, but certainly if we understand that a settler was an occupier, was an invader, was somebody that came and stole our land, killed our people, raped us, and that notion of a settler deserves a bullet. And if the descendants of settlers want to adhere to the mentality of settlerism, one settler, one bullet. So we need to have our own propaganda campaigns that combat the negative that we see. I'm glad you also pointed out the rating agencies. there is an element, a neo-colonial element that sees their only way they maintain power is to stay on the favor of these rating agencies, to make sure that Standard & Poor's doesn't degrade their rating and create a drop in their bond value or increase in their interest rate. And this is very manipulative. And this is something that Africa as a whole needs to unite around and step out of. I wanted to just end my response by emphasizing the need for us to develop a revolutionary African intelligentsia. I'm both impressed by both of the respondents to my initial comments, and it showed a high level of revolutionary intellectualism. I think we need to extend this. This is one of the things that A-APRP has embraced, is the need to develop a broader revolutionary African intelligentsia. It's not only capable in making an analysis in forums like this, but is able to dissect things and take it out into every sector of our community. Because we can talk about this here in a certain level of intellectualism, but being able to then put it into various languages, be able to put it into a down-to-earth type of perspective that someone in a rural area in Rwanda would understand, takes a higher level of work. But we're in a position that's positive. Not only has Africa grown from 700 million in 2011 to 1.4 billion as of this year, but we're experiencing urbanization, a education, a literacy that's at an escalated level. We're experiencing a huge youth bulge, and that Africa has the most significant youth component in any continent. So this has created a potential. We have seen the expansion of the university environments across Africa, both in terms of numbers of universities, numbers of students, and also the openness of many of these universities in terms of being able to actively engage students in a non-repressed manner. We need to take advantage of this climate to help build a revolutionary African intelligentsia. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Trimble, and let's give an opportunity to Comrade Mbutseng Hokong to make his contribution. If you can unmute Comrade Hokong, yes.
Thank you. I just want to pick the brains of the two professors on an issue that really pains my heart. When Africans from everywhere meet at international fora, we speak very passionately about our condition everywhere. Come the end of those meetings, we go our different ways and never keep in touch. As Africans, we have a very serious problem of network. And I want to kindly ask the professors to assist in trying to indicate what the problems could be. I hope that it will not be that the forces of evil are at work. Forces of evil have always been there. And we've been able to do a lot of things. If I take this African continent, for instance, there's hardly any cooperation among progressive forces within the continent. Speaking from the side, say, of the BCM, we were party to the worldwide African Anti-Zionist Front. This was in the late 80s. The organization was initially chaired by the late brother Kwame Ture. The members of that organization hardly ever communicated among themselves. And the Zionist entity continued getting stronger and stronger. What is it that really stands in the way of our unity as a people? The BCM in Brazil has actually translated Biko's writing into Portuguese. But the networking between that and, say, the BCM in Tanzania is nothing to speak about. We had the BCM in the US. I remember Comrade Coltrane Chimurenga, who was active in that. We hardly ever networked. I don't know what it is that has happened to PAM, the Pan-African movement, because I've not heard from the PAM for quite a while now. All that I ask is that the two brothers help us. I'm not saying that they're going to give us a solution. Help us address this problem so that Black people everywhere, Africans everywhere, can have a living link and advance our revolution as a people. Let's not talk about the AU. There's something else, because we know that heads of government of certain countries are already in the pockets of the imperialists. All of us will remember that in 1981, when Muammar Gaddafi was supposed to take over as chairman of the OAU, the West went into African capitals with suitcases full of cash. Lots of heads of government and state wouldn't go to Tripoli. They didn't form a quorum, and Brother Gaddafi couldn't take over the chairmanship of the OAU then. This is my greatest thing. I think that once we network, that will be a very good starting point. It's useless, just highfalutin, talking at fora and doing nothing about our continued work. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Hokong. May I give an opportunity to my respondent? We will start with Comrade Notshulwana and then Comrade Trimble.
Yeah, very briefly, Comrade. It's an important question that the comrade is raising, but it's a difficult one in the sense that we have to start where he ended on, in fact, where he said we must not go. Leadership is critical. Leadership is important in Africa. Leadership that has the quality of consciousness, the same high levels of consciousness that Professor Trimble was talking about, to lead around these, because you can't create an African agency without such leadership. And the next thing you want to have alongside that type of leadership is the considered effort by the leadership to put resources around those issues, around on everything that we say we're going to do. You put resources around that. You finance them, you drive them deliberately to change the situation. But we know the conditions of the continent. I'm going to do what the comrade said we must not do. We know the condition of the continent. 50% of the AU budget comes from Europe, from the European Union. So European Union follows that money. It tells SADC, it tells EAC, it tells the EU to do with that money. So there can be no kind of network that the comrade is talking about, unless and until Africans put resources into it themselves, on the things that they want to do themselves, Africans. And then we put the leadership behind that, we follow that leadership, we organize our people, we create what Professor Trimble calls an African agency. to create that network. There's no way around it. And if we're gonna do the way we are doing currently, we'll always be at the European imperialist stranglehold of being given loans and monies, and then we're told where to put them, where to find resources. We're told where to invest those resources, away from the kind of things that we know we have to do as Africans. So that would be my just 2 cents response to that, Simpiwe. Thank you.
No, thanks for your contribution there, and it's quite interesting that you mentioned that the AU budget is funded by Europeans. I'm not sure if people know that even the headquarters of the AU were sponsored by China, built by China, and everything that is there, including the technology, that was put there was put by China. And of interest is that the Chinese even put servers that connected direct to Shanghai, so that they can be able to know what is going on at a building that they built and contributed to Africa. Professor Trimble.
Yes, China did, I think, actually some positive work in terms of building some of the buildings there. And I know it's controversial about what level they have, but I was just at Midrand this week because they're convening the Pan-African Parliament, and I was meeting with a friend who is a delegate, and he was saying 67% of the funds for the AU are coming from the European Union, not just 50. So that just shows how bad things really are with that. But I wanted to reflect on a couple of points you raised. The worldwide anti-Zionist front, first of all, because in the 80s I was actively involved in. At that time I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and we had localized these efforts to engage with that. So I think that under Kwame Ture, you're right, that was a admirable effort, but somehow it's kind of lost its steam in terms of that. I think that some of that had to do with his transition, and because he had the mobility and the sort of the vocal attention to be able to pull a lot of forces together that others didn't. And I think that does reflect on your comment about dynamic leadership, but also brings to the point the importance of organization, because we never know when one of our strong forces like that will have to go on to the next level in terms of passing. So we need to build strong forces. And that brings me to what you mentioned about the Worldwide Pan-African Convention we had in Soweto and the resulting Worldwide Pan-African Movement. We do have an active website. I'd encourage AZAPO and those of you online to submit to our blog. Like, we do post things on the blog. One of the things that we had asked is each organization to post, their strategy. One of the efforts that PAC had initiated through that was asking everyone to come up with a position with regards to reparations, because we wanted to somehow bring Pan-African organizations together around that. So that is some of the work we're trying to do in terms of the networking, because I agree with Conrad that that is essential. The All-African People's Revolutionary Party is part of that networking. We have our political education work study circle program that's open to anybody. It's not just for those that are part of the A-APRP or want to join the A-APRP, but this is an active program. If you went to our website, any individual, any members of organizations, you can become part of that network where we actually study these materials, from everything from understanding capitalism to understanding the essence of Pan-Africanism and the need for socialism. And that with this network, we are trying to extend not just with the A-APRP, but with other organizations as part of what you're calling for in terms of networking. So that's more of the networking on the ground level, but certainly from the organizational level, that's where we're operating the WWPAM, and it is an active website. Like I say, I encourage AZAPO as an organization to send the strategy that they feel is the central strategy for achieving justice for not only occupied Azania, but the whole of Africa. And we'll post that and share that. And we're trying to engage that in discussions. To be honest, a problem that we're having is moving WWPAM forward. Many know that Chris and Carr was a moving force behind us calling that first meeting in Soweto. He's now a national organizer of the PAC, and that's absorbed a lot of his energy and time. So I think it's important for other organizations like AZAPO to sort of step up and say, hey, let's move this forward. So we definitely want to support your efforts and your call for networking. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Trimble. You know, there's this sense of dependency, you know, right across the continent, irrespective of which country you go to. You know, this thinking of independence and doing things for self and looking at what you can do, what you can fund, is something very significant to advancing the revolution. And I'm just wondering, what is it that you know, people of Africa need to do to remove the shackles, you know, that continue to bind them to this perpetual servitude beyond, you know, having liberated themselves? Because I mean, most of the countries in Africa are no longer, you know, quote unquote, ruled, you know, by the colonizers, and yet we allow the colonizers to continue to perpetuate our oppression. And what is it that we can really do to make sure that you know, people like the African Union realize the power they have over themselves, and people of Africa realize you know, the power they have over themselves? We seem to be, you know, in this unending you know, struggle of having to educate and, you know, and re-educate people about themselves and about the fact that their liberation is not really liberation, so to speak. Professor Notshulwana.
Thank you, comrade. I think to rehash what was said earlier by Professor Trimble, it resolves around the kind of leadership you have, Simpiwe.
Yeah.
If you have leadership that is attentive to what we struggled for and aims. We don't have. That's what I'm saying. It revolves around that. You need the kind of leadership that will consistently push on Africa's complete, total liberation, which is what the Prof started off in his and emphasized in his thesis earlier on. We need that type of leadership. We need those kind of agencies and institutions that will drive that sort of consciousness at the highest level. With institutions like our regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, and the rest of them aligned in terms of that agenda at the highest level, led by people who are consistently attentive to that ideology of making us independent. We won't be independent willy-nilly. The Prof explained it, the structural dynamics of what we're involved in here. We live in a capitalist society that is structured such that it generates itself by sitting on our backs. They have institutions that are at a delicate level aligned to that system, are milking and are jacking up the system. So we need a leadership that will be able to, at the highest level, not the stupidity that we see in occupied Azania today, that we will ever be able to turn around neo-apartheid institutional mechanisms that are generating white privilege on a daily basis in this country. In education, you need a political leadership, even within the charterist organization that is attentive to that as a thesis. And then the antithesis has to be generated at that level. It's not going to change itself. It's not going to move away by us shouting at it. We need a structure, we need an ideology, we need an agent, we need all of the leadership that is consistently attentive to those things and is true to those values, so that we push as a people and align. You take your people with and we're aligned in all of those agendas. And they're located at the highest levels, like you said, at the AU level in all these institutions, so that they drive that agenda. People who don't do that, to get them out of the way. There's no other, it must be a deliberate effort that is led at the highest level by people who are highly conscious of what we have to do. That's what the Chinese are showing the rest of the world. They are not apologetic about that. They are not apologetic at all. Xi Jinping comes to Africa, goes all over, he's followed by a club of Chinese institutions that are seated similar to what the US has done after World War II, when they formed the Bretton Woods institutions. And all the nonsense that we have now, that is an appendage on our backs in the rest of the world in terms of that system, which Prof explained it quite brilliantly earlier on. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Trimble, as we conclude, we have, revolutionary organizations in Africa. We have revolutionary ideologies, that propel these revolutionary organizations to continue to advance the revolutionary program. And what else do we need to do to ensure a truly self-reliant and independent Africa?
Well, I'd like to reemphasize the importance of revolutionary organization over leadership, and particularly at this stage in terms of us developing collectively this revolutionary African intelligentsia. But also it has to be coupled with activism. Just a simple example in reference to the AU. As I mentioned, the Pan-African Parliament is meeting this next couple of weeks. Most people don't even know about it. Yet, as I mentioned, we know in this small circle, some of the revolutionary African intelligentsia know that the Pan-African Parliament and the AU are currently a sham that's funded 67% by the EU, and that's just the EU. That's not talking about the US money or other sources of funds. So very small percentages actually coming from Africa itself. We need to expose that. There needs to be, for instance, an activist campaign that just went to Midrand, publicized this, had a press conference, met with or confronted these so-called African leaders from over 50 countries to say, where's your allegiance? You're a member of the Pan-African Parliament. You're supposed to be aligned with Pan-Africanism, but we don't even have that level of activism. So I think that just sort of to end my comments on those 2 points, the need for us to focus on organization, and at this stage, revolutionary African intelligentsia, and to think creatively in terms of activist actions that will propel us forward in terms of exposing some of this hypocrisy, but also offering in our activism the opportunity to recruit to our organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade John Trimble and Comrade Mxolisi Notshulwana for a great session. And I think it's really helped to elucidate the issues and helped us to continue building a revolutionary movement towards, the true independence of Africa and the true liberation of Africa. And thank you to everybody who connected with us, and we look forward to connecting with you again same time next week. And thank you very much, and goodbye.
Struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're proud to